Welcome everyone to the UC San Diego Library's Open Access Week event, Open Access Publishing Updates and Options. I'm Allegra Swift, the Scholarly Communications Librarian. I'm here with Eric Mitchell, our University Librarian. And we're covering a lot of content today. So in order to give you a broad overview of open access publishing opportunities that you can take advantage of, we'll share the slides, the recording, transcripts, and the guides that we mentioned, and you can refer to that link at the very bottom of the screen. So please send questions through the Q&A or contact us directly with comments or questions afterwards. While a lot of the content that we're going to talk about today has connections to the University of California and UC San Diego in particular, I'll discuss opportunities that could be taken up by anyone, regardless of institutional affiliation. So open access by definition is a set of principles and a range of practices through which research outputs and scholarship are distributed online, free of cost or other access barriers to a global audience. And this presentation has two parts to address this. I'll start off with an overview of a range of OA publishing options in a variety of formats that are open to authors irrespective of geographic location, institutional affiliation, and economic privilege or lack thereof. And then Eric will talk about the recent 15th Berlin Open Access Conference, B15, where hundreds of institutions and consortia from around the world came together to discuss the state of global open access. And then Eric will bring it local to give updates on the University of California's Transformative Publishing Open Access Agreements and how they support both publishing and access to research. But before I launch into the publishing landscape, where publishing has evolved, it's worth noting that open access collections, journals, and preprint servers have been around for about 30 to 50 years. We'll also be talking about initiatives highlighted on the far right of this timeline as we move through the presentation. So the first free collection of scientific research was arXiv, and that started in 1991. It was initially a preprint service for physicists. Self-archiving and a preprint culture in high energy physics is one major reason why arXiv is and has been always really successful. arXiv now includes papers from related disciplines, including computer science, mathematics, nonlinear sciences, quantitative biology, quantitative finance, and statistics. Cielo in 1997 was started, and that's the Scientific Electronic Library Online. This is a publicly funded initiative set up to promote cooperative, free to read, free to publish scholarly journals in Latin America, Spain, Portugal, the Caribbean, and South Africa in languages beyond English. And it's often not included in our databases and indexers because it has a lot of other languages. And those databases usually privilege North American and Western European publications. The Budapest Open Access Initiative in 2002 offered the first definition of open access. The Open Access Initiative is a statement of principles, strategy, and commitment. The declared principles recommended strategies for self-archiving, which is often called green OA, and open access journals, which is called the gold OA, as avenues for transition to open access and to make open access publishing economically self-sustaining. In that same year, the California Digital Library launched EScholarship to provide a repository for self-archiving and open access publishing platform for the University of California authors and creators. And while initially the open access movement was about providing open access to just journal articles, open access as a practice has really evolved and the publishing landscape is rapidly changing. There are many more opportunities for you to share and gain visibility for your scholarship beyond solely a journal article or even a monograph. This is a screenshot of one of our library guides where we provide information and resources to help you discover the best venue to publish and disseminate your research, as well as to find open access scholarship to use in your research and publications. I do need to give a caveat here because tenure and promotion guidelines and what counts as scholarship at institutions has been slower to evolve. The peer-reviewed journal article and monograph are still the gold standards. It varies by university and by department. So it's really a good thing to understand what counts as scholarship at your institution or even prospective university. And institutions that value or at least are open to forms of scholarship beyond traditional journals and monographs may be a better fit for how you want to do your research. And just a note, if you're at UC San Diego, we do consults and workshops on communicating impact for all types of scholarship. So preprints, for example, archive, as mentioned earlier, was started in 1991, but in recent years, we've seen an explosion of discipline-based preprint servers, with some of them connected to major publishers. The Public Library of Science, or PLOS, is one of the publishers that has entered into the UC Transformative Agreements. Authors of existing bioarchive and med-archive preprints can choose to submit their manuscripts for consideration in PLOS through the direct transfer program. So you can even just submit your preprint and then submit it to the journal. Elsevier bought bPress and a data archive to have end-to-end coverage and ownership of all stages of publication. They even bought SSRN, the Social Sciences Research Network, which is a preprint server for the social sciences, economics, law, corporate governance, and humanities. SocArchive was created in response to Elsevier's takeover of SSRN, and it's described as an open archive of the social sciences, and it provides a free, nonprofit, open access platform for social scientists to upload working papers, preprints, and published papers with the option to link data and code. So SocArchive has been supported by grants from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, as well as libraries of University of Maryland, University of California, Los Angeles, and MIT. And about a year ago, the California Digital Library, or CDL, announced the official relaunch of Earth Archive preprint server, and it's now hosted by the CDL. This site provides OA to nearly 1,500 recent preprint publications covering a wide range of earth science topics. So why share your preprints? Speed to access is a huge benefit, and we've seen this especially in the rush to disseminate the COVID-19 research, but it's another avenue for credit, getting early feedback on your publication and research, as well as increasing citations. Another opportunity to get the most reach and visibility for your research is self-archiving in an open access repository like EScholarship, the UC's institutional repository. So EScholarship provides scholarly publishing and repository services that enable departments, research units, publishing programs, and individual scholars associated with the University of California to have direct control over the creation and dissemination of a full range of their scholarship. So we here at the library are the contacts for the UC San Diego instance and provide collections by individuals, department, or research group. We also publish undergraduate research, dissertations, journals, book chapters, entire books, and textbooks. There are over 300,000 items authored by UC researchers and scholars, free to deposit and free to read by anyone, anywhere in the world. So the IRs are also solutions where funders require immediate public access to research that they're funding. And it's also an option when you want to publish in a closed subscription only journal, but still want the benefits of open access. So open access journals, Eric is going to talk, as I mentioned later, about the UC's transformative agreements with publishers that allow for both reading for all and funding for publishing for UC authors. But for those of you who may want to publish in journals that are not covered by the transformative agreements, or you're not currently, or in the future, you're not going to be at a UC, it might be good to note that over 50% of open access scholarly journals do not charge an APC. So maybe you're not on an editorial board. You could transition a journal to open access, which again, it's not an easy thing, but there is support at many of the libraries, including UCSD, and the UC's Office of Scholarly Communication has put together some guidance and it's even held workshops on the topic. Glossa is the most famous case where an entire editorial board on the premier linguistics journal walked off and started over. This is a fully open access journal with no barriers to publishing. Full financial support for this journal is provided with long-term funding by the Open Library of the Humanities, and there's no APC to publish open access. And one of our own linguistics professors, who's a big champion of open access, led the charge of linguistics professors across the UCs to sign a statement of support for the editors walking off and forming the new journal. So we can also help you start a brand new journal. I've worked with a UC San Diego literature professor, Lisa Lamprecht-Weissig, and her co-editors that are across institutions in North America on the creation of a new OA journal on EScholarship, the new Chaucer Studies, Pedagogy and Profession. So publishing a new journal outside of the big commercial publishers allows for more autonomy and agency to produce the publication in ways that support your vision. The editors wanted to ensure that their publication is inclusive to authors, peer reviewers, readers, as well as understand the issues discussed within a global perspective. They're working on mechanisms for assessing this value, as well as reducing barriers to publish for all scholars. And there's no APC. So we also publish undergraduate research, and I'm especially proud of the UC San Diego McNair scholars and their paper series that's in the process of advancing into a scholarly journal. I've recorded interviews with the founding editors and authors, and they're linked on the homepage of this series in eScholarship. So there's been a growth in both business models and academic-led scholar-owned publishing platforms. Major publishers are moving into the open monograph environment as well, but this can come with steep publishing charges for authors, also called book processing charges. OA publishing is not inexpensive, as I said, but on this slide, I'm showing a few examples of innovative models with ties to UC campuses. So one of the things scholarly communications librarians can do is help you find the best OA publisher or platform to meet your needs. Punctum Books welcomes submissions from authors working in any field in the humanities, social sciences, fine arts, and design, and even outside the university proper. They're interested in unconventional scholarly work that twists and innovates on scholarly norms, and is also genre queer. UC Santa Barbara Library is a major partner, and because of the library's partnership, Punctum is able to be one of the very few open access presses in the world that does not charge what are known as the book processing charges. Manifold is a collaboration of the University of Minnesota Press, CUNY Graduate Center Digital Scholarship Lab, and Cast Iron Coding. It's an open source post-PDF publishing tool designed for media-rich projects that may continue to evolve over the initial publication. What's on the slide there is Ultrasound in Research Limited Settings, a case-based open access text that was published last year by faculty at UC Davis Health in collaboration with the CDL and the UCD's medical library. This online open access book aims to provide free access to clinical resource for radiologists and clinicians who practice ultrasound in low and limited resourced healthcare settings. So getting the scholarship that's needed, the research that's needed into the hands of those who don't have access to high cost publications. Luminos is the UC Press's open access monograph publishing program, and it adheres to the same high standards for selection, peer review, production, and marketing as the traditional publishing program, but it also offers innovative structures for multimodal scholarship. There is a BPC with Luminos, but the UC San Diego Library covers the remainder of the BPC for our authors after a discount from the UC Press. So open educational resources are teaching and learning research resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license that permits the repurposing by others. And open educational resources are not just about textbooks. They can take many forms, such as syllabi, lesson plans, videos, software, tests, teaching techniques, group activities, writing prompts, learning modules, experiments, simulations, and course designs. There are no platform restraints. The best thing about them is they save students money, they contribute to student success, and they contribute to faculty agency. The 3D genome textbook is from UC San Diego's Zong Lab. It's on GitBooks. We gave publishing support with cataloging, indexing, bibliographic advice, information that catalogers and indexers need to get the work into the discovery flow. On Bending the Curve, we work with the CVL and consulted on publishing undergraduate research. We worked on author rights and policies. This is a UC 10 campus course with support from the Office of the President, and it's published on eScholarship. This is used in a lot of our San Diego undergraduate writing seminars, saving students, well, actually thousands of students every year, money and ensuring that they have access to the textbook on day one. The two on the right are also published on eScholarship and from UC San Diego faculty in physics, Tom Murphy and Sarah Schneeland in history. So we supported author rights, publishing best practices, copyright clearance, open access and Creative Commons licensed content discovery. We helped them get registered and indexed, getting in the cataloging flow. We help with promotion. We even hired students for formatting and copy editing. And we, for Tom's book, we found platforms for print on demand. And so for those of you who are instructors, including graduate teaching assistants, publishing your teaching materials as open educational resources is not only good for students at this campus and just anywhere around the world, but it's good for you as it gives you another publication to list on your CV and the possibility for communicating impact of your work. Sarah Schneeland, the author of the history textbook, recently wrote me exclaiming, "Having this textbook is so fabulous, it has actually transformed my class. It makes sense now and students can actually learn." Okay, so I'm running up on my time and I have a couple more slides, but I'm just going to zoom through the data one and just let you know that we have data publishing platforms that are unique to our campus, as well as we have instances on other repositories. And we can also find a repository that fits your need. And the research data curation program is located within the library. And this is a great, really knowledgeable group of people that can help you with your data needs. And then the last thing that I wanted to show you is about other OA publishing opportunities, kind of like open culture. This presents opportunities to publish in untraditional formats. It's often a collection of digitized artworks or cultural heritage, often aggregated from cultural institutions around the globe. Or it can be a collaborations with community or storytelling using special collections from the library or cultural community content. The Race and Oral History Project is a digital humanities project and a collaboration between the UC San Diego students, faculty, librarians, and community-based grassroots organizations. It's dedicated to documenting and sharing stories of understudied racial and ethnic communities in the greater San Diego region. The Pueblos Yucatecos is an interactive exhibit based on one of our librarians' dissertation. And I work with King Britt, assistant teaching professor in computer music. His website has open access music and projects from students in his class. And about a year or so ago, I worked with the campus and UC Council on Google Arts and Culture project, the author agreements for the professor and his students. So this is really what the future of scholarship looks like, in my humble opinion.
As I transition to talk more about the agreements that you see, let me actually get started with a quick recap of the Berlin15 conference that Mark Hanna, the current chair of the Committee on the Library, John Hildebrand, our past chair of Committee on the Library, and I attended a few weeks ago. B15 is, as Allegra said, the international conference focused on implementing the goals of Open Access 2020 to transform subscription dollars to open access investments. A key theme this year was on how we build and support the global right to read as well as the right to publish. And it was clear that European countries, Germany, Sweden, and others, as well as the United States, are seeing considerable growth in these types of agreements. And it was equally clear that other countries in Africa, South America, East and Southeast Asia have different economic drivers, and flipping to subscriptions to transformative agreements don't always work in the same way and aren't always as possible. One of my takeaways from that conference is actually, as Allegra has been pointing out, there's not one strategy or solution for open access. And even within the concept of journal publishing, there's not one approach to moving publishers more towards open access. And the movement has really reached a point where we're thinking more globally. And I think that's a really positive thing. The other thing I'll say is that while transformative agreements may not be the path to enabling a right to publish in some countries. The work we're doing here at UC really does enable all researchers from around the world to read globally, and that's a great outcome. And so Allegra, the next slide, please. So Allegra did a great job of providing an overview of different forms of open access. And so before I get into UC's transformative agreements, let me actually just talk about what transformative agreements are. They are a mechanism that allows libraries and universities, or a type of agreement, to shift from a subscription-based model where we pay a publisher some amount of money every year to have reading access, to an open access publishing model where we pay publishers to make the articles published by our faculty and students open access, and in exchange we get full reading access to the platform. As I just said, these agreements help us make some or all of the publications coming out of our university available under an open access license. Transformative agreements are appealing ways to advance open access for a couple big reasons. First, they incentivize major publishers to move away or move to open access by changing the publishing model without destabilizing their funding model right away. Transformative agreements allow universities to make our scholarship open so the world can read it, and make it open on the publisher's platform. And in doing so, we prevent publishers from reselling those articles in the future. And of course, transformative agreements typically allow full reading access to the platform. So the University of California has two forms of transformative agreements. Article processing charge, or APC-based agreements, where each article that's published is covered by a specific charge, somewhere around $4,000 to $5,000 typically. And non-APC based, they're sometimes called platinum OA, where the library essentially subscribes to an open model so that every article on the platform is made available in an open license. UC's agreement with the Association for Computing Machinery is one such example. So next slide, Allegra. So UC's APC-based transformative agreements use what we call a multi-payer model, which funds our APCs, or funds the agreements, through a mix of a base level of library-provided funding for every article, grant-paid researcher funds, or researcher-paid grant funds, if they're available, and a library-paid remainder for all other costs that have not yet been covered. We developed the multi-payer model for a couple key reasons. First, in negotiating with publishers, we realized that the revenue publishers were seeing was a combination of library subscription dollars and author-paid APCs. For Elsevier, this actually was a pretty significant amount of funding that was happening before our transformative agreement. A second reason, we believe it's really important that authors understand the cost of publishing so they can help libraries advocate for cost reduction and make informed decisions about where to publish in the future. I'm glad to come back to this topic. I know the cost model can be complicated, but I'll just summarize with one more point. Our multi-payer model is designed specifically to ensure that any UC author who wants to publish open can do so, even if they don't have grant funding. And for this reason, the libraries will always pay the full OA fee if the author doesn't have grant funding within one of these transformative agreements. So next slide, please. So in a moment, I'm going to walk through a few of our transformative agreements and share some findings we have from our first couple of years. But first, just let me quickly recap how we built the foundation of our work over the last decade. So way back in 2013, the UC Academic Senate led the university in adopting an open access policy that claimed on the author's behalf the ability to publish articles in an institutional repository like EScholarship. UC expanded on that work in 2015 by expanding this policy to cover all UC authors. And in 2018, all UC campuses signed on to OA 2020, which I mentioned earlier, which is this commitment to transform subscription dollars to open access funding. And while our most visible transformative agreement negotiation has been with Elsevier, UC has been negotiating with many of our publishers and now has 10 agreements signed with more in development. So next slide. So before I talk about some specific agreements, let me just give you the high-level view of what we've learned over the last few years. Through our negotiation work, we've made it possible for around 30% of articles coming from UC to be published under an open access license. Our goal is to reach around 70% in the next few years. We've thought strategically about which publishers we'll be engaged with next. And of course, we have a few years of experience with transformative agreements, and we're starting to get data on author uptake rates. for publishing in these agreements. I'll talk more about this in a moment, but for agreements which do have open access enabled, so these transformative agreements, we're seeing authors select the open access option around half of the time. This is great to see. There's been a huge increase in the number of articles coming out of the University of California under an open access license on the publisher platform. But there's also a lot more work to do. Our goal is 100% of articles that can be published under a transformative agreement are made available open. So Allegra, next slide. All right, so in a moment, we'll actually look at that data from 3 of our OA agreements with Cambridge, Springer, and Elsevier. This slide shows our active transformative agreements with publishers. These 10 agreements, as I said, represent around 30% of our total publishing output. And we're actually already working on renewal negotiations, as some of these agreements are a few years old. I'll connect back, actually, Allegra quickly mentioned data publishing. One of the journals on this list, the Public Library of Science, requires authors to publish their data in an open repository as well. And so UC's other open access infrastructure is kind of part of the full package of supporting open publishing. And I'll just reiterate here before moving on to the next slide, that just as the UC presidential policy covers all UC authors, faculty, students, and staff, our transformative agreements cover all UC authors as well. All right, so let's look at a little data. So next slide, please. So as I said earlier, one of my key messages today is that UC authors, when they're publishing in a journal with a transformative agreement, my goal is to have them choose the open option 100% of the time. As you can see from our early opt-in rate numbers on this slide, we've seen good uptake. And so, for example, Cambridge University Press across UC, 515 articles have been published under an OA license. Springer Nature, 1,000 articles have been published under an open access license, and Elsevier around 1,000. In each case, though, these numbers could be about double of their rate. And so our goal is to get the message out that when you have the option to publish open with a transformative agreement, you should absolutely choose that option. Our transformative agreements are structured to provide publishers with roughly fixed revenue. There's a lot of details that go into negotiation, of course, but really regardless of how many articles are published open or not. And so by not choosing the open access model, our authors are actually leaving a little money on the table for publishers and also allowing them to continue selling access to their work. And in some cases, opting out also requires the author to transfer copyright over to the publisher, something that's just bad for authors, it's bad for readers. I believe there's, one of the question we're asking now is, why haven't we seen some higher opt-in rates over the first several months, or over the first year of our agreements? We'll actually talk through a couple different hypotheses here in a moment. We're emphasizing the 3 we have because these are the ones we have best data on. Other agreements like Royal Society, PNAS, Canadian Science are just so new, we don't have good information on publishing rates yet. I will say that the experience at UC is actually mirrored across the nation. Other libraries who have transformative agreements are seeing similar opt-in rates as well. And you'll see with this little asterisk, we've implemented just recently some exit surveys in place to explore more of the reasons for not choosing the open option when it's made available. And so, Allegra, if we go to the next slide, we can look at a few of the hypotheses we have. So our first hypothesis for why folks may not be choosing an OA option when it's presented is that the multi-payer workflows can be confusing and time-consuming. One technical challenge UC had to deal with each publisher, we still do, is we have to build a multi-payer workflow in their system as part of our agreement. And so, for example, with one publisher in particular, open's not the default option. And so we've been working with them to get that switched. And I understand in other workflows, moving back and forth and getting more information and pausing isn't that easy. And so there are technical issues we're working to resolve. I think our, under the what you can do slide, which we have in a moment, one thing we would love to help you with is taking the moment to slow down and review that open access or review that publishing agreement with you. Our second hypothesis is that some authors have indicated they think choosing the open option costs the library more. And so with our transformative agreements, the library's really agreed to pay a set amount to the publisher. And so opting out of open access doesn't save the library any money. And as I said earlier, it actually allows the publisher to continue selling access to your article. The third hypothesis we have is that because authors didn't have funds to contribute, they declined OA. And so in our multi-payer transformative agreement model, we do ask authors who have grant funds dedicated to this purpose to use them. Publishing open is not a requirement of having those grant funds, however. And so I will also, I'll mention here, I guess I've been talking a lot about transformative agreements, which is scoped to those 10 publishers. There are other publishers, Wiley, Taylor and Francis and others, where we don't have a transformative agreement and where the library is not in a position to cover the APCs. And so if you've got a question like this, reaching out to Allegra and asking is actually a great place to start. I will maybe conclude this slide just by saying these are our guesses at some of the motivations. We're trying to kind of look back at what's going on so that we can improve open publishing rates. And of course, if you've got ideas or questions, I'm glad to hear them. So Allegra, let's go to the next slide. All right, so what can you do if you're a UC author? First, as I've said a few times, when you publish in a journal with a transformative agreement, we really encourage you to choose the open access option. As I said earlier, the library is providing funding for you if you don't have that funding with you. And by publishing open, you actually retain copyright and you retain a little bit more control over your work. Second, we ask that you help us share this information with your colleagues. As I said earlier, our goal is to have 100% of the articles that are being published in the journals with transformative agreements published under an open access license. And we just need your help in getting there. Allegra is glad to meet with any of you. I know all of our librarians are experts in this area and are glad to come chat with your faculty and your students, and even on a specific publication issue or even a general presentation. And third, going actually back to the first part of our presentation, if you're publishing a book or you're publishing data or doing some other product of scholarship, we really encourage you to think about how open access might make that more impactful and how it actually might help you be more successful. And the library's here to help consult with you. UC has a lot of great tools in place to help you make use of open options. And fourth, I'll just say, open access is a changing landscape. Allegra mentioned a little earlier that open access agreements tend to be university specific. And so I would encourage you, wherever you are in the world and whichever university you're affiliated with, to learn more about your open access publishing options. And this even includes thinking about the options your co-authors might have at other universities. As I said, every university has a different agreement. And so you may find that one of your co-authors has a different open access option than you do. And so I think our next slide is just a question slide. And so we'll go there. And I see we have one question in the chat that's come in.
The question was, I direct a European Union funded project. The ERC requires deposit of all our publications in an open access site. Can I use the UC's EScholarship as my open access site? I have postdocs working with me on this project who have publications forthcoming, and in press, can their work accompany mine on the site? And absolutely. So I can have a conversation with you about this. Like I said, this is an institutional repository, and one of the purposes of it is to provide access and visibility, but it also satisfies a lot of these funder requirements. So there are several funders that, especially the US national funders, require open access to the taxpayer funded research that they're funding. So what we can do is set up what's called a unit on the UCSD's site. You set up a unit for maybe your department, and then under that, this project, the project title, and then we can pull together all the research, and then you can actually just give them the link to this. You can have an RSS feed on your departmental website that shows the most recent publications coming up. And there's several of our departments and programs, especially the Scripps Institute of Oceanography makes really good use of EScholarship, and they have a bunch of their different labs or research programs and pull together the content under their specific unit. So it shows off the publications and the research that's coming out of your department or program.
Thanks. Very interesting, Allegra. I'm not seeing other questions come in. Allegra, quite yet, so please, by all means, please do add questions if you have them. I'm curious, Allegra, what other types of questions are you getting around open access right now?
I get a lot of, there's confusion about the, especially about the APC. So, so whether there's funding, and that's that point that I was making about EScholarship. People are publishing in journals that aren't necessarily covered by the transformative agreements. And so they're asking about, do we have library funding, which we don't. So if it's a hybrid journal, which means that the journal is closed access unless you pay that open access publishing fee, and people don't often have those funds. And so one option is to not pay the funds, have it published in the closed access, but then take your author's accepted manuscript, that final one, after peer review and edits are incorporated before the publisher's formatting, and you can just upload that into eScholarship and you're good to go, providing open access to your work.
Yeah, I think it's a really strong feature of the UCOA policy. Is that the university took care of all the legal stuff on behalf of all the authors. So, otherwise, as authors, you'd actually have to individually negotiate with publishers to retain that right to put it into an institutional repository.
Yeah, or find it. I've seen a lot of changes within the author agreement. So over the years, and that's what another kind of service that I do, like Eric mentioned, is I work with authors deciphering those author agreements. But the great thing about having the OA policy is that you don't have to dig through these agreements or dig through the publisher's policies on self-archiving. It's just that version, that postprint, that accepted manuscript, that's the one that you can put in the repository, and that's where you're covered by it just makes it so much easier.
So I'm not seeing any other questions come in. Again, if you're attending today and you think this is interesting and you'd like to share with your research team, or you'd like to get out to your graduate students, by all means, please feel free to reach out to myself. Feel free to reach out to our expert, Allegra, and we'll be glad to come and chat.
And I'm going to put, again, the recording and the slides and content at that link that's on this slide here, that OSF link.
Great.
Which is another repository.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.